I learned from a young age that I was invisible. No matter how hard I tried, no matter what I accomplished, my parents only had eyes for my younger sister, Emily. She was their golden child, the one who lit up every room. The one who could do no wrong. In me, I was the shadow in the corner. The afterthought. I remember one summer afternoon when I was 13 and Emily was 11. We were at a family barbecue, surrounded by aunts, uncles, and cousins. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. I had just won the regional spelling bee, a huge achievement that I had spent weeks preparing for. My heart pounded with excitement as I clutched my certificate, eager to share the news. I ran up to my parents, breathless with joy. Mom, Dad, guess what? I won. I won the spelling bee. I held up my certificate, hoping for praise, maybe even a proud hug. But my mother barely glanced at me before turning away. That's nice, dear, she said absent-mindedly. Emily, sweetie, be careful. You'll ruin your dress. I turned to see what had caught her attention. Emily was in the middle of the yard, doing cartwheels, her laughter ringing out as relatives clapped and cheered for her. The realization hit me like a brick. No one cared. No one even asked about my victory. I stood there, my achievement crushed beneath their indifference. My hands tightened around the certificate as I watched everyone fawn over Emily for something as simple as flipping in the grass. It was always like this. As we grew older, the favoritism became more blatant. Emily got everything: new clothes, music lessons, expensive birthday parties. I got her hand-me-downs and a library card. She was the center of attention. And I was the quiet one, always pushed to the background. At first, I tried to earn their love. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I achieved enough, they would finally see me. So I poured myself into my studies, spending hours buried in books, while Emily fluttered through life effortlessly, dazzling everyone with her charm. Then, when I was 16, I won something that I thought even my parents couldn't ignore: the state math competition. It was a grueling contest, where the best and brightest from across the state competed in a battle of logic and numbers. When they called my name as the winner, I could barely breathe. I held my trophy close to my chest, feeling something I rarely felt: pride. That night, I rushed home, excitement bubbling in my chest. This time, they would notice. This time, they would be proud. I flung the front door open. Mom, Dad, guess what? My voice shook with joy as I held up the trophy. I won the state math competition. But just as I spoke, Emily shrieked, "Oh my God, I need a new costume for my dance recital." She twirled dramatically, her dress swishing around her ankles. And just like that, I was forgotten. My mother leapt to her feet, concern filling her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, of course. We'll go shopping right now." My father grabbed his car keys. I stood there, trophy still in hand, as they rushed past me, not even acknowledging what I had said. They didn't come back until late that night, arms loaded with shopping bags, buzzing with excitement over Emily's new outfit. Not once did they ask about my competition. Not once did they say, "Congratulations. We're proud of you." I went to my room, my fingers gripping the trophy like a lifeline. I set it on my desk, staring at it, waiting for them to notice it. They never did. That was the night I finally understood I would never be enough for them. No matter what I did, Emily would always come first. So, I stopped trying. Instead, I decided to carve my own path. If my own parents couldn't see my worth, I would find a place in the world where I mattered. And I did. When I received my college acceptance letter, my hands trembled as I ripped open the envelope. My breath hitched as I read the words printed in bold. "Congratulations. We are pleased to offer you admission to our program with a full scholarship." For a moment, I just stood there, my brain struggling to catch up with reality. I had done it. I had worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into my studies while Emily basked in the effortless glow of my parents' attention. And now, here it was, proof that I mattered. I clutched the letter to my chest, my heart hammering with excitement. This was it. This was the moment they would finally be proud of me. I rushed to the living room, where my parents were sitting with Emily. My mom was showing off a new bracelet she had bought for her, while my dad chuckled at some story Emily was telling. They looked so content. But for once, I had news they couldn't ignore. I took a deep breath. trying to contain my excitement. Mom, Dad, I got in. My voice was shaking with emotion. I got into one of the top universities in the country, with a full scholarship. For a fleeting moment, silence filled the room. My mother blinked. My father turned his head toward me. And Emily's mouth fell open slightly. This was it. This was my moment. Then, oh my God, Emily suddenly shrieked, jumping up from the couch. I need a new costume for my performance next week. My mother gasped, immediately turning toward her. Oh, sweetheart, of course. We'll go shopping first thing tomorrow. I stood frozen, the acceptance letter still in my hand. My big news drowned out in seconds. Wait, what? I stammered. Did you hear what I just said? My father gave me a distracted nod. That's great, honey, he said, already glancing at his phone. My mother didn't even acknowledge my words. She was too busy discussing fabric choices for Emily's costume. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air suddenly suffocating. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, my parents beaming with pride. My mother hugging me, my father clapping me on the back, telling me how proud he was of my hard work. But instead, I was invisible again. Like always, I waited, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would realize their mistake. But they didn't. They didn't even ask what university I had gotten into. I stood there, feeling the crushing weight of disappointment settle in my chest, pressing down until it hurt. The acceptance letter, the one I had dreamed of receiving, suddenly felt like just another piece of paper. A few minutes later, my parents grabbed their keys and wallets, preparing to take Emily out shopping. My mother finally turned to me, as if just remembering I was there. Do you need anything while we're out? I opened my mouth, then closed it. I wanted to scream, to yell, to demand that they acknowledge me. Instead, I just exhaled, forcing a small, bitter smile. No, I'm fine. The door slammed shut behind them, and I was left alone in the empty house, holding the letter in my hands. I could still hear the sound of their car pulling out of the driveway, their laughter echoing as they drove away. I looked down at the letter again, my vision blurring with unshed tears. I had thought this was the moment that would finally make them see me. But now, I realized something. It didn't matter. They would never be proud of me. Not unless I became someone like Emily, someone I had no interest in being. A part of me shattered that day. And another part of me? It hardened. That was the moment I decided, I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their praise or approval. I had worked for this. I had earned this. And whether they cared or not, I would succeed anyway. I sat in the corner of the wedding venue, a forced smile on my face as the music played and laughter echoed all around me. My sister, Emily, stood at the center of attention, glowing in her expensive white dress, her perfect life unfolding exactly as our parents had always envisioned. I had been reduced to the background, just another bridesmaid in her fairy tale. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. The ceremony had been extravagant, the kind of wedding you saw in magazines. My parents had spared no expense, a grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers, and an open bar that cost more than my first year of college tuition. For Emily, no price was too high. For me, I had been expected to fund my own future. I tried to be happy for her. I really did. But as I watched her dance in the center of the room, surrounded by our parents and dozens of adoring guests, I couldn't shake the familiar ache in my chest. I had just landed a major job at one of the top financial firms in the city, a position I had fought tooth and nail to earn. But compared to Emily's perfect marriage, it didn't seem to matter. No one asked about my career. No one cared. I was just Jessica, the quiet one, the afterthought. I sighed, reaching for my barely touched champagne, when I felt a presence beside me. Isn't this beautiful? My mother cooed, sliding into the seat next to mine. Her eyes shined with pure joy as she watched Emily and her new husband, Kevin, twirling on the dance floor. It is, I answered, my voice hollow. She turned to me, tilting her head slightly. You know, sweetheart, now that Emily is settling down, maybe it's time you started thinking about that, too. I nearly choked on my drink. Excuse me? Well, she continued, as if she hadn't just crushed my last bit of patience. You're getting older, and with your job, I imagine it must be hard to find a man who wants to settle down with a woman so busy. I stared at her, feeling my jaw tighten. Busy. That was what they called my success. The life I had built for myself, the career, the promotions, the financial independence, was nothing more than a burden in their eyes. And then, as if she hadn't already thrown enough salt in the wound, my mother added with a wistful sigh, "I just wish you could have what Emily has." Something inside me snapped. I set down my champagne glass with a little too much force, the clink making my mother flinch. "Mom," I said, my voice deceptively calm, "I don't want what Emily has." She frowned, as if the idea was incomprehensible. "But every woman wants a family. Dear, you can't just work forever." I exhaled sharply, running a hand through my hair. "You think my life is empty because I don't have a husband?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "I have built everything on my own. I have a career I love, a home I paid for myself. And I don't need a man to make me feel complete." Her expression darkened, but I didn't stop. "Emily's wedding is beautiful, truly, but that's her dream, not mine." For a long moment, she said nothing. She just stared at me, as if she couldn't recognize her own daughter. Then she sighed, shaking her head. "You'll regret it one day," she murmured, her voice heavy with disappointment. And with that, she stood up, walking away before I could say another word. I sat there, my heart pounding, my fingers trembling slightly as I reached for my drink again. It was like I had just shattered some unspoken rule, one that had been weighing on me my entire life. For years, I had tried so hard to earn my parents' approval. I had studied until my vision blurred, climbed the corporate ladder with sheer determination, and hoped, prayed, that one day they would be proud of me. But now, watching my mother disappear into the crowd, I realized the truth. They would never be proud of me. Not unless I became Emily. And I never would. I took a deep breath, swallowing the bitterness in my throat. Then I lifted my glass in a silent toast to myself. To the life I had built. To the future I would create, on my own terms. And for the first time that night, I truly smiled. I sat at the dinner table, the clinking of silverware against porcelain filling the room. My parents, my sister Emily, and her husband Kevin were all here, gathered for what had been presented to me as a simple family dinner. But I knew better. There was an uneasy energy in the air, like a storm looming on the horizon. My father cleared his throat, setting his fork down with a deliberate slowness. "Jessica, dear," my mother began, her voice syrupy sweet, too sweet. "We've been thinking about your house." My stomach tensed. My house, the one I had worked my entire life for, purchased with years of sacrifices and late nights. My own safe haven. I placed my wine glass down slowly. "What about my house?" Emily shifted in her seat, giving me that same smug, self-satisfied look I had seen my entire life. "Well," my mother continued, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "You're single. You live alone. And that's such a big house for just one person." There it was, the trap they had been setting since the moment I walked in. I glanced at Emily. She wasn't even trying to hide her excitement. "Jessica," my father said, his deep voice laced with fake sympathy, "Emily and Kevin really need more space. Their apartment is just too small for two growing kids. And, well, it only makes sense that family helps family." I blinked. "You're joking." No one laughed. "You want me to just give them my house?" Emily beamed. "We would take such good care of it," she chirped, as if I had just offered it to her on a silver platter. My parents nodded in agreement, as if this was the most logical solution in the world. "You could find a nice little apartment," my mother suggested, as if she were offering me a cup of tea. "Something more suitable for someone like you. Someone like me. Someone without a husband, without children." I felt my fingers curl into a fist under the table. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I worked for years to buy that house. I sacrificed. I saved. I made every payment on my own. And now, because I don't have a husband or kids, you think I should just hand it over?" Silence. Kevin cleared his throat awkwardly, finally speaking for the first time all night. "Jessica, we'd really appreciate it." I turned to him, rage bubbling under my skin. "Do you even pay the rent on your own apartment, Kevin? Or is that covered by my parents too?" His face reddened. Emily huffed, crossing her arms. "You don't have to be so dramatic." "Jess." "Dramatic?" I let out a bitter laugh. I'm not giving you my house, I said, my voice as sharp as a blade. My mother gasped. Jessica, no, I repeated, louder this time. Absolutely not. My father slammed his hand on the table, his usual calm demeanor finally cracking. Jessica, stop being selfish. Selfish. That word, that ugly, cursed word they had thrown at me my whole life whenever I dared to put myself first. I had spent my entire existence being overlooked, ignored, and cast aside in favor of Emily. And now, the one thing I had built for myself, the one thing that was mine, they expected me to hand over without a fight. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a slow, deliberate motion. I'm done with this conversation. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, Jessica, you don't even need that much space. I turned to her, my eyes burning with all the resentment I had buried for years. And what have you ever worked for, Emily? I asked. Her smug expression vanished. Mom and Dad have handed you everything on a silver platter. They paid for your wedding. They bought you a car. They babysit your kids every weekend. And now you think you deserve my house, too? She stiffened. It's not like that, she muttered. Then what is it like? I snapped. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like entitlement. The tension in the room was suffocating. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. My mother clutched her pearls as if I had just cursed them all out. And Emily? She looked like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. I grabbed my coat, turning toward the door. Where are you going? My mother demanded. I looked over my shoulder. Home, my house. And no one, not Emily, not my parents, not anyone, was going to take it from me. It had been 3 weeks since that disastrous family dinner. 3 weeks since I had refused to give up my house. Since my parents had called me selfish and my sister had acted like she was the victim. 3 weeks since I had cut off communication with all of them. I hadn't expected them to take it well. But I also hadn't expected what happened next. At first, the guilt-tripping began. A flood of text messages from my mother. Mom, Jessica, you're tearing this family apart. Can't you think of someone other than yourself for once? Mom, Emily is heartbroken. The kids are confused. Is this the kind of aunt you want to be? Mom, please, let's talk. I didn't respond. Then came the calls from extended relatives. People I hadn't heard from in years. Suddenly appearing out of nowhere to lecture me. Aunt Susan, I just don't understand why you won't help your sister. Jessica, what's a house compared to family? Uncle Greg, Betty always looked out for you when you were little. Can't you do the same for her now? It was infuriating, the blatant rewriting of history. Emily had never looked out for me. She had taken everything handed to her while I was left forgotten in the background. But the worst was yet to come. It was a cold Thursday night when it happened. I was home alone, curled up on my couch, a cup of tea in my hands as I read through a financial report for work. My house was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock. Then, a noise outside. A faint scraping sound. I froze, my pulse spiking. It was coming from the front door. I slowly set my tea down, my body on high alert. The sound continued, metal against metal. A slow, deliberate movement. Someone was messing with the lock. My breath caught. Someone was trying to break in. Heart pounding. I tiptoed to the door, peeking through the peephole, my fingers clutching my phone, ready to dial 911. And that's when I saw them. Emily, my parents, Kevin. They were on my porch. Emily was kneeling by the door, a hairpin in her hand, trying to pick the lock. My parents stood nearby, watching like guards, and Kevin was a few steps back, shifting nervously on his feet. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. My own family, trying to break into my house. I didn't think, I acted. I yanked the door open. They all jumped back, caught red-handed. What the hell do you think you're doing? My voice shook with fury, my hands trembling with rage. For a moment, they just stared at me, stunned. Then my mother, always quick to recover, stepped forward with a forced smile. Jessica, sweetheart, we thought you'd be at work. Work? They had been waiting for me to leave. They had planned this. They were actually going to move in behind my back. I looked past them, my stomach dropping as I spotted a car in my driveway, packed with boxes and suitcases. They had brought everything. This wasn't some desperate plea for a conversation. This was a hostile takeover. My father cleared his throat. Jessica, we knew you wouldn't call the police on us. We're family. After all, family. That word made me sick. Move out of my yard now. My voice was low, cold, and filled with rage. Emily huffed, crossing her arms like a spoiled child. You're being ridiculous. You're just one person. What do you even need all this space for? I laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. That's not your decision to make. My mother sighed as if I were being difficult. Jessica, we were just trying to help. By breaking into my house? I snapped. By moving in without my permission? No one had an answer. I lifted my phone, dialed 911, and held it up for them to see. Last chance. Their faces drained of color. Emily's bravado shattered, and Kevin grabbed her arm. Come on, let's go. My parents hesitated, but even they knew this had gone too far. Without another word, they turned and left, piling back into their car and driving away. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and slid down onto the floor, my whole body shaking. It was over. But I knew this wasn't the end. I didn't sleep that night. Even after my family had driven away. Even after I had double-checked every lock in my house. I couldn't shake the feeling of violation, of betrayal. They had actually tried to steal my home. I lay awake in bed, my mind racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then, suddenly, a thought hit me like a lightning bolt. The security cameras. I had installed them weeks ago after my family started harassing me. But I had barely checked the footage since. My breath caught in my throat as I grabbed my laptop, heart hammering as I opened the surveillance files. Please, let this be enough. The video loaded, and then, there they were. Crystal clear. Emily and Kevin sneaking up to my front door. My mother and father standing watch. The footage caught every detail, Emily kneeling down, pulling a hairpin from her purse, whispering something to Kevin, who nervously glanced down the street. But then, something even worse. I turned up the volume. The audio was perfect. Emily's voice, sharp and hushed. Kick the dog. If he bites you, we can use it against Jessica. We'll tell the police she has an aggressive animal. Then she'll have to choose, give us the house or lose the mutt. My stomach turned to ice. I felt sick. Kevin hesitated on screen, but then he actually did it. I watched. Horror struck. As he kicked Buddy, the dog yelped in pain, then instinctively lunged, biting Kevin's leg. Kevin staggered back, cursing, clutching his leg. Emily let out a fake, high-pitched scream, loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. They had planned it. They had tried to frame my dog. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I had already been furious before, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. They had hurt Buddy, my loyal, loving dog, just to manipulate me. And now, I had proof. By morning, my rage had settled into something cold and sharp. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to end this. I called my parents. My voice was steady, calm. We need to talk. Come to my house. Bring Emily and Kevin. There was a pause. Then my mother's voice, sweet. Fake. Of course. Dear, I knew you'd come to your senses. I could almost hear her smirk. An hour later, they arrived, smug and confident. Emily strode in like she already owned the place. She wrinkled her nose at my decor. God, Jessica, your taste is so dull. We'll have to change everything. I smiled. A cold, knowing smile. Before we talk, let's watch something first. I grabbed the remote, pressed play, and let the footage speak for itself. My family's smugness vanished. My mother went pale. My father's jaw tightened. Kevin looked like he wanted to run. And Emily, oh, Emily, her face drained of color as she heard her own voice echoing through the speakers. Kick the dog. If he bites you, we can use it against Jessica. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then, chaos. That's fake. Emily stammered, her hands trembling. I generated. My father added weakly. I tilted my head. Is it? I clicked a few buttons and pulled up a live camera feed of us right now, proof that the footage was very real. Kevin's eyes darted toward the door. I laughed. A slow, amused laugh. Kevin, sit. He did. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Jessica, you wouldn't. Wouldn't what? I cut her off. Expose you? Call the cops? Ruin your life the way you tried to ruin mine? My mother's voice broke. Jessica, sweetheart, we're family. No, I said, my voice like steel. We were family. You ended that the second you tried to steal my home. Then, a knock at the door. Right on cue. 4 police officers stepped inside. My parents begged. Emily screamed. Kevin tried to run. None of it mattered. The security footage was undeniable. Kevin and Emily were arrested for attempted break-in and blackmail. My parents were escorted out. But not before my mother turned to me. Her face streaked with tears. Jessica, please. I looked at her one last time. Get out. And with that, they were gone. That night, I picked up Buddy from the shelter. The second he saw me, his tail wagged furiously and he covered my face in happy licks. I held him close, whispering, "We're safe now, boy, we're finally safe." And for the first time in my life, I felt free.